Hello, and welcome to Bitesize Legal, where we tackle legal issues one bite at a time. My name is Drew Jenkins, and I'm an attorney licensed in Georgia and Alabama. And to coincide with the new year, we're starting a new series on starting your own business. And we're going to start right at the beginning, and that is business entity selection. So you've decided that you want to start a business. It may be just yourself, or you may have friends, family, or partners involved with you. And you need to know, all right, how do I get started? And then one of the first questions that you're going to have to answer is, well, what kind of business legally do you intend to be? We're all familiar with the corporation. Most of you have probably heard of the limited liability company, or more generally the LLC. I'm sure a lot of you are probably actually operating as a sole proprietorship, even if you don't realize it. And we'll talk about why it's important to know the authority under which you sign documents. So a quick bite on that. If you have an entity and you're not signing your name as member or manager or CEO or capacity in that entity, you're signing it as an individual, and that can lead to some pretty severe consequences to you personally. But back to this, so sole proprietorship, maybe you have a general partnership, a limited partnership, a limited liability partnership, a limited liability limited partnership. Yes to all of the above. These are all different business types. Perhaps you're in a state that allows family corporations for companies that are owned by families, or even closely held corporations, or perhaps professional corporations that have certain tax advantages if you meet the criteria for a, quote, professional corporation. But in time, we will cover all of these. And so if you are out looking for an advisor or a specialist to help you form the right entity, always be aware if you walk in and they say, oh, I always put people in a corporation, or I always put people in an LLC. This is actually fairly common. Most attorneys, accountants, enrolled agents with the IRS, they have their go-to documents that they use. But that's not really looking out for your best interest. Whoever you sit down with and discuss needs to know what your goals are. If you intend to do fundraising, and if so, from who are you going to do it and how quickly? All of these are going to change the specific entity type that may be most appropriate for you. So just keep that in mind as you're going out there. So why are entities important, right? Why can't you just go out and start business yourself? Well, the truth is you can. You just need to be aware of your risk. So all of the entities I've given you are either created to help pool resources in the case of a general partnership, or they provide some level of risk mitigation, right? So if you are running a restaurant, what are the risks? Well, the risks are food poisoning. The building burns down, someone gets hurt, something bad happens in the parking lot, right? And so the question becomes, if any of these events occur, who is going to pay? And your first response should hopefully be, well, insurance. Well, that's excellent. I'm glad you recognize the need to have insurance in that particular situation. Now, what happens if for some reason the damages exceed the policy limits, or heaven forbid, the particular risk wasn't covered under your policy? It was an exception, some weird fluke that's not covered. Let's say an enormous flood occurred and it damaged someone else's property that for whatever reason was stored on the premises, and you didn't have flood endorsement or flood coverage. Well, in that case, if you are the sole proprietor and everything is in your name, that's going to come out of your personal pocket. And that's how people wind up in personal bankruptcy. Now, another bite for you to keep in mind is that it doesn't matter what kind of entity you create. If you're signing a personal guarantee for any of the loans or leases, you're still going to be on the hook. And we'll talk about those in detail later as well. Just think of this kind of as a bigger overview. So you've decided you have a business, you have sat down, and you have also written out the risks that you need to try and eliminate or mitigate. You've also got insurance quotes to find out how much insurance you're comfortable paying for the premiums. But there's another way that will cost you a little bit less over time and can help you mitigate a significant amount of risk. And those are any of our limited liability entities. And those include corporations, limited liability partnerships, limited liability limited partnerships, and the limited liability company. Now, you may hear some people say that, oh, trusts will do this too, and trusts will make things very private. You need to look at your state laws, but the states that I'm familiar with, I strongly advise against using trusts for running active businesses, right? If you needed to own businesses, and trusts are excellent for estate planning tools, but they are not designed for the day-to-day operations of profit-making enterprises, right? So I would generally still steer clear of that unless there are some specific circumstances that dictate otherwise. So you've got the business, you've got the risks, and now you need to know, well, which entity should you choose? And I'm here to tell you that for some of you listening, you're not going to choose an entity at all. Your risk profile is so low or so minimal that even though you are in business, there's really no benefit to putting an LLC or a corporation at the end of your name. Truth be told, it's more hassle than it's worth, because once you file these companies, they become separate from you for the most part. Right? We'll talk about that when we talk about LLCs and disregarded entities, but they lead a different legal life from you, which also means you're going to have annual filings at both the state and federal level, generally, to let them know how this new entity is going. You're probably going to have to pay business privilege taxes that you might not otherwise have to pay. So these are considerations that you will want to keep in mind. So join us next week as we continue our Starting the New Business series, and we're going to talk specifically about partnerships. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to leave comments below. If you're watching on WeChat, please respond in thread, and see you next week.